Alright, kitty. Scram, okay? How about this? You stay on my lap. I know. Sorry. Hello, Internet. Back again with guess you'd consider this a socio-political commentary. The date of filming is January 10th, 2018, and recently there's a debacle in, I guess, I don't know if it's an online publication or a magazine, but the company H&M, they sell clothing. They featured a picture of a young black boy with a shirt that read the caption, coolest monkey in the gym, or coolest monkey in the jungle, rather. And this, I think, should be obvious, raise some questions, some alarms, and stuff like that. The implications of some underbelly of racism amongst the company, etc. And it made me think back to an advertisement that was on, I believe it was a London subway here a few years ago that I believe had a similar stance in that. Stop, kitty, you're distracting. Quite innocent in nature, but they failed to perceive the consequences of, the uh, how it might be interpreted, rather. So this advertisement a while ago had the caption "End Racism." It had a white hand meeting a rather hirsute primate hand, like a monkey, an ape of some sort, and the caption said "End Racism." And my personal interpretation was, oh, it's common ground of this. I guess the accepted theory of the day is that we evolved from monkeys, or that rather the orthodoxy says we have a common ancestor. But I personally don't believe this, but mainline scientific world does. So that's how I thought that it was supposed to be interpreted. That's the viewpoint that I think it stemmed from. But obviously, people took this as saying that Europeans are humans and that African and their descendants are animals. So that was interpreted as blatant racism, and in all actuality, it might be completely innocent by the creator, just not having the wherewithal to see how other people might interpret it. And this leads me to the statement I heard a while ago. It's a sort of a little maxim that offense is always taken, never given. Now, obviously, this is not always the case. People say things that are intentionally offensive, but I think more often than not, we see things that are cropping up that, originally were never intended to be offensive, whether it be, oh, here's another thing. Cliven Bundy was released, and his family, after 2 years of incarceration here today, or yesterday, the cases, all charges were dropped against them. And one of the things that made the mainstream media when this was happening I believe it was Nevada, was that Cliven Bundy in a speech used the term Negro, and that's not very PC anymore. Whereas, he's an older gentleman. It could very well be that he, meant no derision, wasn't trying to slight anyone, but this was the socially acceptable term here, a generation or two ago. So again, it's one of these things where the offense was taken, but it might not necessarily have been implied. And that's sort of an interesting concept. I heard someone say that, I think it might have been Stefan Molyneux, but the term person of color is the politically acceptable. They gather under this banner. But if you say colored person, that's offensive, even though it's the syntax of the word is the syntax of the words. But should we be done? We done? Kitty's getting older. He's having troubles retracting his claws, which means I'm his pincushion more often than not. As you can see, we're filming in the exact same location. It says locale. Well, Bundy incident was rather interesting. You've got not, I guess it may be precedent, but generations of that family roaming their cattle, rearing their cattle on this area of land, and then Bureau of Land Management, they want to be environmental, etc., saying that it's unfit because there's protected species. That wasn't the tipping point. The tipping point was that, I don't know if it was Harry Reid or one of these other bureaucratic politicians that's been in there way too long, had already sold the land to Chinese firms. And they found out about it, and they said, you don't care about this tortoise or whatever it was, frogs, some other amphibian. You don't care about that at all. That's not your primary directive is to make money, and subsequently screw this family that's been raising cattle there for generations. And I believe the reason the charges were dropped was just because there was some blatant wrongdoing on account of the prosecution. Alex Jones reported that the client attorney confidentiality had been breached, that the prison they were in was actually tapping and recording the conversations that were supposed to be private and classified confidential. So there are a number of other things, like some of the Bundy boys were saying that they were having routine cavity checks, day after day sort of thing. So sort of the abuse of power that perhaps went on. And I think another thing was I believe this was Jeff Sessions, but he through his input while he wasn't on the case should have had no sort of tainted the case by throwing in his opinion, proffering his opinion, saying this is what I believe, that they're this, that, and the other. And ultimately, I think the right decision was reached to let them go without any charges. It's rather unfortunate that it came at the loss of life of Robert Lavoie Finicum, and there's enough to talk about that on a separate topic. But sort of awakening too that we see, it's not just police that have armored personnel carriers, etc., mine-resistant, ambush-protectant tanks. That it's these rather elusive Bureau of Land Management and these other just bureaus that have no elected power, no elected officials. It's just like people talk about Obama's czars at the beginning, where he was appointing this person as charge of this new agency and that new agency, and the taxpayer has very little say on it. In fact, most people don't have the wherewithal to realize where their money is even going. So, I think it was 2012 era that it was made public that some 5.7 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition was issued to various agencies. Department of Homeland Security was one of them, but they'd also it was umbrella. Like they thought it would be too charged to issue all 5.7 billion rounds to just that one agency. So they put it to agencies that had no use for it as sort of like a cover up of where it was really all going. Again, sort of ties into this topic where people are, left wingers in particular, are concerned that the American citizen has an AR-15 with a very small to medium sized projectile, but most of them don't seem to know or to care that the United Nations has some 80 Bearcat tanks in my state, and that there's drones that don't have to come down for 5 years at a time. And in the Midwest, there's airport, the hangars. There's hangars full of unactivated drones just stockpiled there. But those sporting rifles, if they've got more than 10 rounds, then mass murderer, check. Anyways, this is getting more of a ramble, but thanks for watching.